So, one of the things I find kind of the most interesting about this time of year is athletes don't realize exactly how important this part of the season is. I mean, we
Okay.
kind of we kind of talked about is there an off season last time, but it's just how important this is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, this is a critical time in training. There's all kinds of things you can fix. There's all kinds of things you can improve on, and you've got nothing standing in your way but a couple of winter months to do it. This is the optimum time to start addressing all of those things. Yeah.
I, and it's funny because being a track coach, I know you probably get it a little bit with your enduros, but somebody like me, hey Brian, when am I doing an FTP test? Right?
It's funny you said that because about 2 hours ago, I got asked that question, that very question, from one of my riders. And it's like, yeah, we'll get to it. um,
But as a road coach or as Grand Fondos and that type of stuff, it's one of those things that I get asked all the time because individuals almost use that like an identity. You know,
okay.
in the right settings, if you're like, hey, my FTP is 300, it's pretty cool. My FTP is 200, and in the wrong setting, you're like, oh, really? That's it. So I thought something we could do is kind of have a discussion about what is FTP? What is this magical thing? Um, you know,
Sure.
you have been coaching for 40 plus years,
Too damn long at this point.
right? So I've been coaching for 25, and we both have seen everything from the bro science and I guarantee there's a couple things. If I say it, you and I have years ago kind of parroted this whole, oh yeah, well you've just got too much lactic acid in your legs,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
then we find out that, oh, in the 1890s they actually proved that that's not true.
Yeah. Once upon a time, many, many moons ago. Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting too because I was kind of pondering this a little bit earlier while I was riding, and um, I think we latch on. I think we latch on to the data we can actually look at, um, and get really obsessed with it as cyclists, which is, not, it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing. But I think we miss the broader picture if we get too focused. The FTP, I think, is a very, it's an important thing, right? It basically sets up all of your zones. It sets up all of your training, how to train, where you're training at, what you're training for, all of those things. But because we can look at that number and go, oh, well, you know, this is my FTP. We get a little obsessed with things like that. Cycling to me, and I'm a 42 years at this point. I'm a bit old school in my thinking in a lot of ways. I appreciate the technology and the science behind it, but um, you still have so many different factors you have to consider, as an athlete, as somebody that's trying to improve whatever niche in the sport you're trying to improve. But yeah, I think it's important. I think people get a little overblown with it. Hence the, yeah, my FTP could have gone up 2 points, since the last time you tested me. And oh my God, what are we going to do now? How do I adjust my zones? I think that gets a little, maybe just go ride your bike at
Yeah,
that point.
especially when your
But
power meter has a tolerance of plus or minus 2%.
sure, sure. And the other thing that's interesting for me specifically is I hate sitting on the trainer. I hate it. It's got to be a miserable, godforsaken. There's a class 5 hurricane coming in. Although I'm probably in big trouble if there's a hurricane coming in Colorado. But um, it's got to be some pretty nasty weather to keep me indoors. I would just as soon go ride in a snowstorm if I had the traction to be able to do it, and to simply just to avoid sitting on the trainer. But the funny thing is, there's that psychological thing. My FTP, and I've tested it myself on the trainer, on the watt bike, on various ways. Basically, taking the power meter on the bike and going out and just hammering for 20 minutes. And oddly enough, if I'm out on an actual bicycle riding, my FTP is probably 20 points higher than it would be like on a standard ramp test.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that, that I tell a lot of people is like, look, at the beginning of the winter, if you want to do an FTP test and do it on the trainer and use that number to kind of set what you're doing through the winter, that's great. If you're not going to do that, take 15% off of whatever your FTP you think it is now and use that to set it. I had one athlete, and Chad, if you're on here, say hi. He could get on a trainer and he could sit there at 320 watts.
Yep.
Hour. For an
hour.
Yeah. Just sit there.
Yep. I've had athletes that do the same thing, and they just go, wow.
And then he'd go out and do a TT, and be able to maintain the exact same power outside.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So kind of a weird one. It's funny you bring up a ramp test. I get that one all the time too. It's like, hey, which is better? Is a 20-minute test or a ramp test, or what CTS is 3 times 10 minutes? And then what about blood lactate? What about doing a blood draw? And it's kind of interesting how all those come up. And now you got time wear coming out, and you've got a strap now that will measure your VT1 and VT2, which is kind of so.
Yeah, really cool stuff, and I think all of that, I think those tools are great. You just have to keep in mind that it's an apples to oranges or an apples to apples comparison. I guess if you stay with the same, if I jump from my road bike to my track bike to my my trainer to a watt bike to whatever, all of those data points are going to get skewed simply because of the what am I trying to say here? The fact of the, help me out here, Chuck.
Well, you got crank arm length differences. You've got stages versus cork. You've got,
yeah. And all of that margin of error. There we go. That's what I was looking for. The margin of error was what I was looking for.
Right.
And as long as and I guess I liken it a lot to, I've got a scale that sends an electronic impulse through my foot and measures resistance and tells me how fat I am. Is it accurate? Yeah, probably not. But is it repeatable? Yeah, probably to a point. So if I have, if I use that as my reference point and it's going the direction I want, I'm probably pretty okay. Is it a DEXA scan? Absolutely not. Right.
Right.
It's and that has to be taken into account too. I think the only problem I have with any of the data points we can actually look at on those little supercomputers that hang off the handlebars is that we get a little obsessed with what that number is at any given point, right? Because it's going to fluctuate. There's so many things that are going to affect that. If I didn't get a good night's sleep last night, my FTP is going to go down.
Yeah. I think the only value of an FTP number, or an FTP number, an LT number, a VT1 number, VT2 number, whatever. I think the only value coming into the winter for that is just so you really can make that determination of what that zone 2, zone 3 is.
Mm-hmm.
I could care less about zone 4. I could care less about zone 5. I want that. And the reason why is if you think about it from, what we're actually trying to measure with a lactic threshold, we're trying to measure that production, we're trying to measure that transport, and we're trying to measure that oxidation, and you're testing the system. And this is a point in time in which mitochondrial density is what you should be building. Sure. And that's at zone 2. that everybody talks about and no one defines.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting too, because and back to the obsession thing, right? So, my FTP is terrible. I typically sprint, at almost 100 times. Am I doing the math right?
Oh no, you are. Yeah. You and
Okay.
we roll around with an FTP of 170 to 180, and you're hitting somewhere between 14 and 1600 watts.
Yeah.
PMAX.
Yeah. So when when I'm sitting on Zwift and it says I'm at zone 5 at 500 watts, I'm probably really not. But
right.
But I think it's a great tool. I think it's something that you should have a pretty good idea of. But I think plus or minus X number of FTP points probably continues to build that that mitochondria that you're looking for, with being the whole purpose of that anyway. So.
Right. Well, I think that's the reason when, last week when you were talking about, just go get on the mountain bike, go ski, go hike, because all of that, if heart rate, we don't get our heart rate up to go hard. It's just giving us a proxy for how much work we're actually doing. So the heart rate follows. So if we're doing enough work that we can actually cause a response, and the heart rate is in that zone 2, lower zone 2, mid zone 2, then you're actually building that additional mitochondrial. And
sure.
that from my perspective should be the full focus of winter. Now that doesn't mean you can't once a week hop on Zwift and do a Zwift race. Yeah, go for it. As long as you keep in mind the goal is to build that aerobic base.
Right. Sure. Yeah, and I think that's important too for the psychological aspect of it. Whether you're doing a Grand Fondo or sprinting at Worlds, we all have that competitive element. We all have that. Even on that group ride you jump into, it becomes Thursday night World Championships in a lot of cases. And I think there's a benefit to that as well. I think you have to keep those upper systems online.
Right.
If you spend all of your time just sitting in zone 2, parked in zone 2 for days, weeks, months at a time, then you've got to rebuild all the rest of that stuff as well. I think my personal philosophy on it is, you tap into that every once in a while and just kind of remind the system that, that hasn't gone away. We're still going to use that every once in a while. So you might want to keep that fire stoked a little bit. But yeah, I think, obviously I think the important time of this season, this time of the season is getting that, that aerobic base, building that strength, looking at the other stuff that you need to do to be successful in whatever you're doing. Right. And knowing where your FTP is, in, now or April or July or whenever, is really important if you're doing a 45-minute, 1 hour time trial.
Right.
And you can really kind of guide yourself in on that. But as we all know, anytime you get more than one person around you on a ride at all, that's going to fluctuate. You're not right. going to be, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be doing a criterium down the road at or a scratch race or something along those lines anywhere near FTP. It's going to be bouncing wildly all over the place based on the fact that I got 60 of my closest friends trying to make that difficult for me.
Yeah. Hey guys, if anybody's got any questions, you can always throw them in a comment and we'll pull them up. Yeah, I think that's another thing that most people don't realize is when you think about it from, what is FTP? FTP is not a physiological thing. It's a coaching thing.
Right.
The physiological thing is the lab testing. So
yep.
It's kind of an interesting one. Oh, somebody's asking about a camp. That was on my phone. So So yeah. So from your experience during this time period, what have you found to be the best way to build that durability, to build that aerobic base?
For me, I think it's a mixture of things. I think I'm a lazy sprinter. I don't want to go out and ride my bike for 4 hours because, well, that just doesn't sound very much fun. But if I'm riding my mountain bike for 3 hours, or if I'm tooling along cross country skiing, which I'm terrible at, which puts me over zone 2 all the time.
Yeah, now you're in zone 5.
Yeah. No, I'm actually at that 500 watts. But I think mixing it up. I think doing some different things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, skiing or going swimming or whatever. It just do something different, do something where you can actually refresh yourself while you're going out and do that. I'm not quite sure what specifically you're asking, but
No, I was just just from a programming perspective, when you look at your athletes, when you're looking at athletes, what we've got folks on here that don't have a coach, so it's
right.
like how would what kind of structure would you build over a winter time period in order to help them build that aerobic base, that mitochondrial density, and that type of stuff?
Typically, I would program 3 to 4 days of some longer longer zone 2 stuff. Working on staying in that low to mid range FTP. On my end of things, that's supplemented with with 3 days, 2 or 3 days worth of pretty intense gym work on top of that, and then just basically focusing on the aerobic capacity side of it, the strength side of it, and then throwing in a workout, probably a workout of something that's interesting, challenging, and well above zone 2, just to keep the systems working.
Right. Yeah, because I've been thinking about it, because I've talked about this before. If you can't measure it, it's not really worth doing. And I was trying to think of a way to do that. So here's a recommendation for those that are watching: is Training Peaks Virtual now has the ability to actually hold your heart rate on a workout in erg mode.
Okay.
So what I was thinking was that you would do like an FTP test of however you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Ramp test, 20-minute test, whatever, and just kind of established that mid zone 2 heart rate. So let's say 130, 135. Okay. then get on Training Peaks Virtual and hold that 135 for 45 minutes to an hour, just riding along, whatever you want to do.
Sure.
Write down that power number that you can maintain. And then at the end of the winter, doing the exact same test. And if you've done the proper amount of base work, what you'll actually see is you'll be able to maintain a higher amount of power at that heart rate over the winter, which means that you actually have developed that mitochondrial density that then you can do sweet spot training with to help with the transport of lactate. And then you're actually raising your FTP.
And that's an interesting point that I hadn't really thought about. If I go out, I have been doing this so long that I'll park it at zone 2, and power doesn't change more than about 3 or 4 watts, and heart rate doesn't change more than about 3 or 4 beats, and I just blindly, dumbly go tool along just fine, without actually having considered that option. That's a brilliant idea to get a really good feel for where you should be with that sort of training. That's excellent.
It's that scientific athlete and that artist athlete. Your Cat 5s are your scientific athlete. They're going to sit there and they just want to stare at. They want to use erg mode, which, guys, I hate erg mode. They're going to look at erg mode and they're just going to sit there and watch it and try to do it. And then the artist athlete, I used to have a client, or I used to have an athlete named Lance. And I tell Lance go do an FTP test, and he'd take his computer, he'd turn it on, stick it in his back pocket. 2 hours later, he would pull it back out, turn it off, and he would have one done in the middle of it.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
And he wasn't trying to do 20 minutes. He wasn't trying to do anything. It was just, he was an artist.
And that's a good point. When you're new to the sport, you know, we had a comment here.
Yep.
When you start out, you know, you have no idea of really anything, right? You know, so those tools are going to be, you know, the way you described, figuring out FTP, heart rate versus power, et cetera. Absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant for that. And right. that will lock you in. When I started, we had none of that. Right. So it was, you figured it out, you know, it's like, okay, well, can I go this long, you know, can I go an hour at this pace? Yes, no, maybe. And if you blew up 45 minutes into it, you know, we did a lot of time trials back in the day, and that's kind of how we figured most of this stuff out. You know, that steady state power, just trying to hold whatever that speed was, whatever that cadence was, whatever metric we were using, and it was strictly by feel.
Right.
You get really good at being able to do that after a while, but it takes a while. It takes you know, it took years, right? You know, because you didn't have anything to reference with at all. And that's one of the really cool things about all of the tools that are coming out now, is that you can do stuff like that. And, you know, instead of trial and error, which is kind of how I started the sport. Well, it's definitely how I started the sport. More error than trial, but, you know, that's a fantastic way to approach it.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that, is because like one of my very best time trials, the only thing I had up on my computer was my cadence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I maintained 95 as hard as I could.
Yeah.
If it dropped down to 93, I shifted. If it went up to 97, I shifted.
Yeah.
So Michael, you did ask a question, and I touched a little bit on it, but I think this is a very important question. I'll answer it from my perspective, Brian, then I want you to think of it from yours. So, you know, there's a couple of ways to transition from base. And if you look at if you look like at Hunter Allen and those, they make the assumption that once you've got a CTL of greater than 50, then you can transition to something else. From my perspective, I think it's dictated more about where you are in your training plan. And, you know, the more time that you can stay in base, building, like I said, you've heard me say it a bunch of times now, that mitochondrial density, the better off you're going to be long term. So if you've got somebody who cyclocross, I mean, they don't need to be ready for racing until October, you know, now August. So you've got a lot of time that you could build a lot of really good foundation. Whereas if you've got somebody who's got a race in February, you don't have that time. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. You know, I think anytime, you know, you can build more of a mitochondrial base, you know, all the way up to the highest zones you can possibly, you know, match sprinting, doing a kilo, something along those lines. The more ATP you can get into your system, the better off you're going to be, right? So it's gonna have a significant effect leading up to that. The only caveat I would put on that, I think, is that you know, depending on time frame, you know, from a track perspective, where everything is mostly anaerobic work anyway. That speed and that ability to get that lactate tolerance, it takes a while to build. So you're going to have to make an adjustment. I guess you're going to have to cut it off just a little bit sooner as like a kilo rider, something where you're basically dumping the entire tank in a little over a minute. You're going to have to take a little bit more time to start building those upper systems. So it's tricky, and it's a bit, because everybody's physiology is different. You really need to take a look at what your natural strengths and weaknesses are, and adjust for that. Right. So I can spend, because I've been doing it for 42 years, speaking for myself, I can spend a long time, I can spend, well into April, really making sure that I'm hitting that base, for as long as possible, kind of all the way through there. Obviously, as we're getting closer to whatever your season is, you start adding elements of your race specificity at that point. But I think, I fully agree. I think as long as you can do that, and I will try with myself and with my athletes, even my purely anaerobic, sprinters, trying to make sure we're making sure we're getting a little bit of that, trying to maintain that, obviously that's going to start degrading as you get, as we get closer to nationals and worlds, that's going to start degrading, because we're really focused on that speed element of it, that absolute power element of it. But I think trying to hold on to that as long as possible, even all the way through, even all the way through into the meat of your particular season, is critical.
Yeah, Michael. One thing that I think we kind of glossed over, but we should talk about is what exactly is going on in the system. And early on when we were talking about how you've got the production, you got the transport, you got the oxidative, and then you've got the kind of the emergency system. And what that means is that the more the time you can spend in that production, it's actually going to, all seas rise. That is what's going to provide that foundation to actually have a better transport. When I'm talking about transport, I'm actually talking about moving lactate across the cell walls into where Brian was talking about ATP for type 1 muscle fibers, and ATP-CP for type 2 muscle fibers. That's that transport. That's that sweet spot. And then at oxidation and testing is above that. So kind of think of it in three ways. One is building that entire mitochondrial base. That's your zone 2 type of stuff. That sweet spot is helping the body be more efficient at transporting that, shuttling that lactate. And then the efforts above that is just kind of testing it.
Sure.
So,
and the higher you get into the you start getting out of that oxidative state, the more mitochondria you've built over that process, the longer you stay in that oxidative state before you go completely anaerobic. Even in something like a 1 kilometer time trial, and I'm an old kilo guy, and that's about the most nasty, miserable, godforsaken way you can spend a minute of your life in pretty much anything that I've ever done. It's absolutely brutal. It's absolutely miserable. But the longer you can stay in that oxidative state, because of that base you've built, I don't know, I don't want to say more pleasant, because it's certainly not more pleasant, but the faster you can go for a longer duration, even at that highest level.
Right. Because that's the point in time in which, you're trying to maintain that production of lactate and the shuttling of lactate out of the system at somewhat of a similar level. Once that goes up, that's when fatigue starts kicking in, and you're just gracefully fall apart.
Yeah. Once you slip into glycolysis, the game's over really quickly. So the longer you can stay out of that, the better you're going to be, and that goes, and I keep talking about kilos, but, that goes to the last 5 miles of a fondo, that goes to the last, that last 500 meters of a sprint, all of those things. The more mitochondria you've built up over the off season and, through the season, as long as you can, before you have to actually start focusing on event specificity, the better that's going to turn out. The better energy production you're going to have, the better clearing of the hydrogen, everything. All of that stuff is going to be significantly improved by doing the stuff now.
Yeah, exactly. So what else, Brian? What other wisdom should we throw out there before we sign off?
You got a list. Let's see. I think the key thing for me, aside from obviously, working on that aerobic base is taking the opportunity while you're working on that aerobic base, work on some skill sets, get with a few of your buddies, go do some paceline work, go work on the efficiency part. One of the things that, the old school part of me keeps touching on is, FTP is a number we can, is a quantifiable thing we can look at. We can look at CDA, but wind tunnels are expensive. We can look at position on the bike. We can look at pedaling efficiency. We can look at finding that optimal cadence. We can look at bike driving skills. What happens if somebody touches a wheel? I had a 246-pound buddy of mine. We got our signals crossed making a left turn on a ride the other day. We were going along, and the last time I'd ridden this particular route, the left side of the road was closed and under construction, and it had subsequently opened, and he knew it, except he was on the right side, and he said, "Okay, we're taking a left here," and I continued forward straight, thinking that, okay, well, my turn's not coming for another 20 feet. And he was correctly assuming that
Nate turned left.
And Nate turned left. Yeah. So yeah, I had a 246-pound dish towel draped across my neck at some point. And we had a good laugh about it. And, it was like, yeah, that was my bad. I should have actually paid attention to what I was doing, but we stayed upright. Right. And when a 246-pound guy is laying on your back, you really don't want to fall down at that point. So work on those things. Work on, being comfortable in the position. Hell, work on getting a drink or reaching into your jersey pocket.
Cadence on rollers.
Cadence on rollers. Yeah, absolutely. Because you can put a small enough gear on and ride zone 2 on a set of rollers at 180 RPMs in theory.
Yeah, you should have seen it the other day. I had the rollers out of the RV in the parking lot at Love's truck stop, and people were looking at me like I was absolutely crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I remember way back when Hannah was in ballet, if you can believe that. And so I would take her to ballet and sit there in it was like at a rec center kind of thing, and put the rollers up on the sidewalk in front of the rec center. And yeah, it was like a crime scene, with the crowd gathering around. It's like, what the hell are you doing? So you get party trick props with that as well. So.
All right. Well, we've got a few minutes over. I think we'll wrap it up. If anybody's got any comments, just drop them off. If you got any suggestions on what you would hear on the next show, just let us know. So, Brian, thanks for your time. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Chuck. Always enjoy doing this. This is fun.
And we'll figure out what we're going to talk about next week.
Sounds like a plan.
Oh, hey, are we going to do it on Wednesday since next week's Thanksgiving?
Oh, yeah. We probably should do it on Wednesday since next week is Thanksgiving. So
does Wednesday work for you?
Yeah, as long as as long as nobody minds, I could potentially have a big nose diaper on Wednesday. I don't know when that's actually going to happen because it hasn't been scheduled yet. But yeah, if nobody's offended by that, I'm perfectly fine with it. So
All right, so we'll tentatively next Wednesday.
perfect.
All right, guys, see ya.
We'll see ya.